Go on, Amara.
Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Good afternoon from a rainy Islamabad. My name is Amara Durrani and I'm Senior Fellow at the Jinnah Institute. The Institute is very pleased to welcome here today our an audience for tuning into our live panel discussion on the state of Pakistan-India relations and strategic stability in South Asia. The dialogue is brought to you by Jinnah Institute's Strategic Security Program that builds knowledge and solutions to Pakistan's strategic interests and stability in our region through interlocution and dialogue. The Jinnah Institute leads the longest running Pakistan India track tour called the Chow Track that brings together South Asia's most eminent thought leaders and practitioners for bilateral exchanges. Our panelists today are Pakistan's most foreign policy trailblazers who have also represented the country at the Chow Track. Today's conversation will build on their first-hand experience and articulation on foreign and security policy issues in South Asia. Ladies and gentlemen, the summer of 2020 will be remembered not only for the all-consuming COVID-19 pandemic, but also the dramatic play-out of the recent China-India military standoff on the line of actual control. Our panelists will look at key dimensions of post-Ladakh geopolitical and geoeconomic scenarios and potential policy options for Pakistan and its neighbors. I'm very pleased to introduce to you our esteemed panelists today. I'm joined here by President Jinnah Institute, Senator Sherry Rahman, who is chairing today's session, former Ambassador and Special Assistant to Prime Minister on Foreign Affairs, Mr. Tariq Fatmi, former Foreign Secretary and Ambassador, Mr. Rahman Bashir, Advisor to Saudi Ministry of Defense, Major General retired Khabar Hanif, author and senior journalist, Mr. Zahid Hussain, author and senior journalist, Ms. Naseem Zehra, who will join us shortly, and last but not the least, columnist and senior fellow Tabadla, Mr. Musharraf Zaidi. To set the context, we'll start with Senator Sherry Rahman's opening remarks. Sherry, over to you.
Thank you. I hope you could hear me and the mic is unmute. Is that all right? Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. It's wonderful to see you this rainy afternoon. Thank you, Amara. Very briefly, I'm just going to say two things. One, and the rest we will leave each of us to unpack and then conclude. One, Ladakh is still not a post-Ladakh state. Is there going to be a post-Ladakh? Let's look at it. Right now, we are told that there is a process of disengagement and de-escalation. I think we're all looking forward to that because this is a volatile region, the 3 nuclear countries with 2 tense borders. The geopolitics of this conflict have very wide implications both within the region, Asia and beyond. So I think we need to not just understand what this means for the 2 countries, but obviously for Pakistan, because it has seen various impacts of such conflicts. But the point here is that the public conversation about this very volatile stalemate is that there is a disengagement. Yes, there is, but it is not complete. Number one. Number two, this whole conversation has been publicly, globally, about tactics. It is clearly the need of the hour to try and unpack what exactly is going around. There was never enough information from any side from day one. So we have it's a Himalayan region. All of us have been bogged in the weeds of how this happened, what exactly is going on. So yes, it may tactically have been about infrastructure on one side, a PLA response on the other, a threat perceived on either side. It's a question of which side you look at. The border is one of perceptions for very large tracts. It is not one that has been solidified, we've discussed that, or even mapped in many areas. Now, which brings us to wonder what implications this has and what is the forward process for the disputed region of Kashmir, because that to me is the strategic point at which this all three interests converge and the point where this whole conflict was triggered. I say this because beyond tactics, it has been the August 5th unilateralism and the regional predation of Modi's New Delhi that has triggered this kind of worry in China and specifically, obviously, the taking in of Ladakh as Union territory. Again, very egregious unilateralism that has then caused China to become a literal party to the Kashmir conflict. This is my view, and I want to really just quote. There's been not very much talk from China, that's their diplomatic system. But on June 4th, I'm going to conclude with what the deputy director of a Chinese ministry, state security affiliated think tank said, the Institute of South Asian Studies at the China Institute of Contemporary International Relations, Wang Shida. He writes, on the Chinese side, India opened up new territory on the map, incorporated part of the areas under the local jurisdiction of Xinjiang in Tibet into its Ladakh Union territory. This forced China into the Kashmir dispute, stimulated China and Pakistan to take counteractions on the Kashmir issue and dramatically increased the difficulty in resolving the border issue between China and India. Close quotes. According to Shida, India's unilateral move of abrogating Article 370 and 35A from the state of J&K posed a direct challenge to the sovereignty of Pakistan and China. This is a big remark. This is a big statement, and it's coming out from a state affiliate. Most of them are in Beijing and China. So I think with those remarks, which set a context, obviously, there are thought leaders here, and everybody will think of what they want to say and how they view. There are many aspects of it which we went over last time, related to CPEC, related to the broader West Pacific, and of course China's interests as an emerging Asian power. And I'd just like to say that even at this point, as COVID kind of tumbles forward, we see the Chinese economy as the one that is recovering first and foremost, and it still poses casts a formidable shadow on not just Asia's economy, but on the globe. So with those remarks, and obviously with the United States still in a pole position to build alliances against China, no, those are not all military and strategic. We are in a complex world of evolving multipolarities, and I think a discussion about that is also in order. And I thank you for listening to me and hearing me out, and I look forward to an exciting and robust discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sherry. That's a dynamic context that you've set, and lots of thought questions that you've put on the table. The border is a perception, you say. Beyond the tactical, the disengagement is not complete. Before I turn to our panelists, a quick housekeeping pointers for our panelists as well as our live audience. We are live streaming on Jinnah Institute's YouTube channel, as well as live tweeting through Jinnah Institute's Twitter handle at Jinnah Institute, where audience can also post their comments and questions for the panel. I want to turn to Ambassador Tariq Fatmi first to open the discussion. Fatmi Saab, has the game changed? Has the regional game changed? What are some of the new fault lines that you see for China, India, and Pakistan, and the region as a whole?
Thank you very much, and thanks to Sherry for inviting me. The fault lines are in the process of undergoing changes. We cannot be sure at the moment as to exactly where these fault lines will go and what its impact will be on the various countries that are located in this region. Let me begin by first of all commenting the Ladakh encounter was not tactical because China does nothing which has not been well thought out. The Chinese had been telling the Indians for a long period of time that they had to refrain from the activities in which they had been engaged that included massive construction of defense-related facilities and such things. Also, I want to tell you that the losses suffered by India are much greater than what the Chinese themselves have claimed. I have my sources in Beijing, and the number of Indian prisoners returned is, and it may shock you, at least 120. But the fact that the Chinese themselves have not revealed this figure is because the Chinese strategic interest lies in not further heating up a situation that is already hot. They do not want to give either the Indians the opportunity to lay claim on the sympathies and support of Europe and America, nor do they want the Americans to come back with that information to Delhi and tell Delhi that it has no other option but to strengthen its linkages to the United States. In other words, the Chinese long-term goal is to retain its linkages with India. And that is why you see no evidence of any popular anti-Indian sentiments in China. The Chinese foreign minister's own statement has been very balanced and very moderate. It is in India where there is a strong sense of anger and outrage, because Modi's claims during all these years has been that he is an activist. He does not take insults from anyone. And now that the Indians have suffered human losses, material losses, and also have been pushed back, let me remind you, the Indians have been pushed back from areas that they were using, temporarily occupying, which were on China's side. And therefore, Modi is under pressure for the first time ever since coming to power, not only from the Congress, but from other political parties, from the media, from social circles, as to where is his bravado. He was humiliated by Pakistan's action, and I think he's still waiting for an opportunity to respond to that. And before he could do that, now he has suffered another setback at the hands of China. I think it's a very evolving situation. We have to keep a very close look at it. We have to watch out exactly what the United States, because Trump is also facing challenges, and for the first time there appears a slim possibility of him actually losing the election. He could do some very strange things if it is needed for his electoral success. We want to see how the Russians behave. So far, the Russians have played a moderating role on both Delhi and Beijing. And finally, we have to remain in very close contact, consultation, and concert with the Chinese so that there is no daylight between Beijing and Islamabad. Thank you.
Thank you, Tariq Saab. Very rightly observed that the fault lines are still developing and this needs to be observed closely. You also make a pertinent observation that China is moving with restraint and with an approach towards resolution of conflict, but that is not the approach visible in India. Salman Saab, I want to come to you with the question, the point raised by Sherry earlier on how Kashmir has become a central point in this new escalation. If China is moving with restraint, as Tariq Saab says, and if the whole plethora has opened the centrality of Kashmir, how does the current situation change the territorial question between Pakistan, China, and India on the disputed Kashmir region? How does it centralize Kashmir, and will China be willing to be an active party to the Kashmir dispute? Please unmute yourself.
Thank you so much, Amara and Sherry and Tariq. I think I agree with what Sherry and Tariq have said earlier. Kashmir has figured in, as was quoted by Sherry Rahman in that Beijing-based think tank report, as a central trigger for the Ladakh unfolding of the Ladakh situation. Uh, of course, when I say that Kashmir is also a territorial dispute, I think the Ladakh episode brings it very clearly in sharp focus, the territorial dimension of the Jammu and Kashmir dispute. For the Indians, it's always been territory. For us, it has been the right of the people. The Indian claims to Azad Kashmir and Gilgit Baltistan also are territorial. And of course, the region of Ladakh happens to be part of the Jammu and Kashmir state, which was dissolved by India unilaterally. And the Chinese clearly said that this was unacceptable. The Chinese are a pragmatic people. They have reacted, I think, with a lot of restraint, but they have sent a very clear message to Delhi. While I agree with Tariq Fatmi Saab that it is in China's long-term interest to have good neighborly relations with all states, especially in the region South Asia, which includes India. But basically, what they are saying is that there are limits to their tolerance. And even the Chinese ambassador in Delhi, in a 17 minutes video broadcast, his core point was, please do not make a strategic miscalculation. Now, that is where the thing really is in my mind. And if you allow me, I will try to sort of give you maybe my personal academic perspective, reversing the order, placing all this in the bigger context. Now we all know about the trade war, the so-called new Cold War between U.S. and China. We've also seen the degree of restraint and the degree of reason being exhibited by China in response to the U.S. actions. But let me put it to you, just for further reflection, that what really has triggered this US China situation in the geopolitical sense has everything to do with the structural changes that have happened in the Western economies. Many factors, but primarily due to globalization. Now, if the Chinese benefited, or to a certain extent the Indians benefited, or the East Asians benefited from globalization, is something evident. But the problem, as US-China is being played out rhetorically and in terms of whatever movements of naval carriers, etc. But the real problem is the fault lines in the Western economy. What I'm trying to say here is basically as follows. India has put a premium on geopolitical power play. They forgot that it is, albeit an important country in South Asia, but they absolutely forgot their neighbors. This geographic reality of India, I think, is also now been made evident by the sense of isolation that even the Indian commentators are saying. India's isolation within South Asia. Now, why has this happened? It has happened because, in my view, again, this is academic, because we have seen the rise of the BJP, the RSS, and the Modi on the wings of methods and slogans which are essentially medieval in nature. They have catered to the medieval instincts of the populace, And Modi, I'm told, still has 75% plus popular support. The Indian media has just been organized into submission. So there is a fundamental redefining of India which has taken place. And as you know, this whole thing about secularism, Nehru's idea, and the despotic rule of a medieval type that is now being imposed on India and being accepted by the people of India. That is one. And Shari Rahman rightly mentioned the predations, the regional predations. You know, that started some time ago under Modi. You know, the Balakot and all that, the surgical strikes, and then capitalizing on all that were just few indicators of where he was going. And they forgot that you know, you can't do it. You can't take chances with a much stronger country like China, because they just were ignoring that. Uh, so this has also implications for India itself. Uh, this, the coherence within India we are seeing is breaking, is falling apart. We are seeing not only dissonance but major disruptions, which are in the making and can affect the Indian Union. All of this is taking place. There has been this talk of a two-front situation that India now faces in terms of Indian strategic thinkers. But India is in big difficulty. I would say it has jeopardized its future uh, to, to the politics of the RSS.
So, Salman sir, I
Uh,
want you to, if you may, if you permit me to say, I want you to hold on to that thought. We want to come to the domestic dimension of India's ultra nationalist politics and how that is playing out in the foreign policy domain. I want to come to General Khabar Hanif. General Saab, the scenario that Salman Saab and earlier Sherry and Tariq Saab have shared, how do these developing fault lines affect the existing strategic security equilibrium for the region, considering that all the three countries, China, India, and Pakistan, are nuclear armed countries? And, unlike the old Cold War, this is now turning out to be an active escalation point, this region. What kind of repercussions does this have for the nuclear weapons of the three countries, and what does Pakistan need to do immediately in terms of the military dimensions of this escalation?
Thank you so much, Amara. First of all, it's a privilege to be part of such a esteemed panel. I'll just share some of my thoughts on it, taking on from what Sherry said. It's, I think, in my opinion, politically and militarily, it's a sub-tactical level action, but it has actually ended up in having a lot of strategic effects on the regional stability as a whole. A couple of things that it has done. First of all, I think it has fundamentally deflated the 56 inches chest ego of India, particularly when you look at it as a sequel to what happened in February 2019. Secondly, it has actually brought China deeper into Kashmir conflict. It has raised China's interest, its stakes into the conflict as a whole. It has also exposed that India's ambitions or its wish list of becoming a regional power was not supported by the fundamentals that are required for a country to become a regional power. In terms of strategic stability, I think how is it going to affect? First of all, Pakistan can hope for a deeper and a greater politico-strategic support of China going forward. Already, Chinese have deployed a fair number of troops in the northeastern region of India, as you know, I think something numbering 200,000. And in any future India-Pakistan conflict, China's mere presence will generate the strategic effects because of which They will not be able to disengage a lot of their mountain divisions, which were deployed and were to move towards their western borders to be employed against Pakistan. At a larger level, I think if you look at Nepal, um, the Indian influence in Nepal has been neutralized by Chinese engagement with Nepal to a considerable degree. In the region and in general, China is coming in with 400 billions of investments in Iran, which would, of course, have an impact on India and Iran relationship. Then you have a Sri Lanka situation developing vis-a-vis India, which will have an impact again on the regional security dynamics. So there are, I think, even though this is an isolated incident, but it has to be looked at as a whole in the strategic setting. Again, vis-a-vis Pakistan, I think India has been leaning on the global environment of counter-terrorism, which was running seriously against Pakistan, and India really took a huge advantage out of it. Secondly, Pakistan's assistance in bringing about the stability and political settlement in Afghanistan actually, and of course, one has seen the Indian isolation in this context, has brought the strategic situation favorable for Pakistan. I think going forward, if we were to continue to remain part of the strategic setting that currently prevails, and China's greater involvement and influence in the region, the strategic, let's say, equation has, for short-term and long-term, become in Pakistan's favor. Because going forward, as I said, in the overall strategic setting, Pakistan can hope for a greater support from China, as opposed to the times so far. So that's, in brief, a couple of points. And I think going forward, if there is some more questions, one can talk about it. But one more thing before I go forward. I think US-India relationship is somewhere between infatuation and between disenchantment at the moment, because India has not been able to play the role that US expected India to play in the region. So therefore, in the strategic setting, they will not have the same kind of support going forward from US. You might have seen a couple of aircraft carriers in the South China Sea, but that does not mean they are in here for that strategic equation in the South Asia per se. Secondly, Russia, which has been a very, very close ally of India over the decades, is not too happy about India overly leaning towards West and US for getting the defense technology. So all of these developments, I think, will change the strategic equation in Pakistan's favor. What should Pakistan do? I think the immediate ramification of this development for Pakistan could be some kind of a false flag action against Pakistan, which has been happening previously as well. I don't want to get into the details or the classified information, but in my opinion, it may not be so much the application of air power as we've seen in the past. It may well be some ground incursion that India would like to do to restore its damaged ego. So Pakistan needs to be prepared for that all along. I do not see an immediate possibility of a full-scale war being waged by India against Pakistan. With that, I'll close my remarks. Thanks, Amara.
Thank you, General Saab. If you do not foresee a full-scale escalation, that is reassuring to know. I want to come to Naseem Zera. Naseem, an observation has been shared that perhaps the India-China standoff is a one-off episode. And if there is de-escalation, if there is disengagement, perhaps there may not be a repeat. What is your sense from a security and military perspective, and what kind of upgradation of threat perception matrix do you envisage for Pakistan? If you could unmute yourself, please. Unmute yourself.
Okay. So just thank you to everybody all over again. Thank you, Amara, Jinnah Institute, and thank you, Sherry. Most of the comments that have been made, I guess, generally one would agree with. But here's what I think, Amara. I do see this as one-off thing, but its significance is strategic. So, number one, India miscalculated and thought it could do a Siachen vis-a-vis China. And what we see is China responding with a Kargil, and China responding with a Kargil, but will be able to hold on to what it's, what it's gained. It will stay on the strategic heights. India does come under pressure. China has drawn the red line, has clearly demonstrated to India that you can't go, you can go this far and no further. I think that's broadly speaking in terms of the events between August 5th, 2019 and where we stand today. I think that if we recall, Amit Shah, I think, said that Aksai chain is our territory. We will get it by hook or by crook, something to that effect. And I think China is not about to compromise there. And when China realized what India was up to, that airstrip it was trying to fix, landing for C-130s and so on and so forth, and fixing the road so it could bring in its defense equipment, its part of the troops, just what it did in Siachen. But China was quick to respond, and China has now, is now strategically so placed that it will keep India under pressure. I think while, and most of the Indian analysts, strategic analysts, agree that India, that China is not going to go any further. I mean, China is certainly not looking for a fight, and I agree with entirely what Tariq Fatmi sir was saying, because Chinese, they believe in 1,000-year strategy. Chinese are not looking for a battle tomorrow. In fact, I think it's an important point that they're very subdued in even what they're saying. Not only with the Indians, you recall that the foreign minister said the other day, we want to work with the Americans, we want to, we sort out issues and so on. I mean, the question is, have we come into a new Cold War situation? My answer would be no. And the reason why I'm saying no is we are into containment. US coming into South China Sea to contain China and not let it come and, take over and have a permanence in the area which is disputed. We are seeing containment of India by China, not making sure that India doesn't go any further, doesn't threaten what the Chinese are occupying. But the complexity of the economics, the complexity of the commerce that is global between India and China. I mean, look at the China exports in that 100% kind of the trade that is there between China and India. 70% of it is going from China to India and 30% from India to China. And then obviously US investments in China and so on and so forth. I don't see any kind of extreme steps being taken by any side. I think we will live in the world of grades. It's going to be containment and making sure things don't erupt. What does this mean then for Pakistan? I think that what it means for Pakistan is that that in Gilgit-Baltistan, in Azad Jammu and Kashmir, India can't be up to no good. That's the red line which comes through from the Chinese. What happens in Indian occupied Kashmir? What happens in to the Kashmiris? I think that in some ways we see that the Kashmir issue moves out of the human rights issue, and it emerges as an interstate issue if you were to look at Jammu, Kashmir, Ladakh as one whole. But having said that, I don't see that the Kashmir issue is going to emerge on any radar with any more significance than how it exists at this point. It will now again. I guess the question is there anything that will happen that we won't talk about and we can't, that doesn't fall in the realm of diplomacy, etc., or open military confrontation? That's one big question, and that is for China and Pakistan to look at that. But beyond that, I think one of your questions were very interesting, Amara, that came from Jinnah Institute. For example, one question was, can we look at a trilateral mechanism for settling these issues? I don't see that happen. I don't see that happen. China wouldn't let it go that far. Also remember the Aksai Chin, the boundary agreement between Pakistan and China, the 1963 agreement. If you look at its wordings, you'll realize that this whole thing staying in gray kind of works for China also. I don't see that. And China, mind you, China plays it subtly always. China is not going to get into a role or into a situation where it would be part of any conflict. I mean, China is always advise Pakistan on Kashmir to take it easy, etc. So I think the question is, again, is there anything that Pakistan and China would do behind the scenes? But openly, I don't see China letting itself become a major player. One kind of one-off situation is possible. Could China, if India, if this situation gets out of control, in Ladakh, can China raise it in the Security Council and say, let's settle Jammu and Kashmir issue for once and for all, because this is all linked to that? That's a possibility, and I've heard people talk about it, but I don't see that happening. I think China is going to look for containment. China is going to look for continuity in these relationships. And the Kashmiris, I think, as far as Pakistan is concerned, Pakistan's role, in terms of helping the Kashmiris project the human rights aspect, Pakistan's role in terms of, talking about broken agreements by India and saying, and pushing diplomatically on Kashmir, settling Kashmir, OIC is zero. There is no other country which is willing to come in. Of course, Turkey talks about it, Iran talks about it, but can any of these countries substantively change anything in terms of Jammu and Kashmir and in terms of what the Kashmiris are going through? I don't think that's possible, but the question will always be, what are the Kashmiris going to do? They must, I'm sure the Kashmiris in Indian occupied Kashmir are deriving some kind of solace and comfort from where India is right now vis-a-vis China. But will that translate into anything substantive for the Kashmiris? I think what will translate into anything substantive for the Kashmiris is going to be what the Kashmiris do and how far Pakistan, goes in terms of promoting the Kashmir issue. I think by and large, these would be my comments.
Thank you. Thank you. I think from your comments, I'm getting a very strong sense that you see the status quo to more or less continue on Kashmir, regardless of the Ladakh standoff. And I actually want to unpack this question a bit further by involving other speakers also and getting a sense from them on how they see it, but not before quickly asking some very specific questions first from Zaid Saab and then Musharraf. Zaid Saab, I want to come to you. The militarism that we are seeing on the eastern border, on Pakistan's eastern border, is in stark contrast to some really decisive policy shifts that Pakistan is experiencing vis-a-vis its western border, i.e. the Afghan theater, the Afghanistan space. In the last few weeks, we've seen some phenomenal confidence-building measures between the Kabul government and between Islamabad. Despite the drawdown contentions, looks like Kabul and Islamabad are on the same page, and there's movement towards some kind of breakthroughs. This stands in stark contrast to the saber rattling that we are seeing coming from Delhi. How can Pakistan balance these two contrasting scenarios?
Okay, thank you so much. But first, actually, on Ladakh. Ladakh did not happen instantly. I mean, like, it did not happen in May. Yes, clashes started there, but basically the Indian build-up has been going on for quite some time. In fact, actually, if from the Indian media itself, actually, for almost 2 years, India has been building infrastructure there, and with a purpose. I mean, we have not discussed about what is the main objective for India. Number one is Ladakh has always been a point of contention between India and China. Don't forget that 1962 war between China and India started from Ladakh. And the same area has been Aksai Chin. That has been the point of contention between the two countries. The second thing is that after 1976, there has been clashes in that area. But for the first time, there has been loss of lives. There has been clashes after 1962, but there has been border arrangement. There has been line of actual control has been decided. But this is much more serious in a way because although no firearms have been used, still actually the tension is very high. What I see actually that China has been watching this situation very closely. Maybe actually India has miscalculated China's reaction. And it's also something to do why in China's calculation. Don't forget about the CPAC issue. We have not discussed it, the implication on CPAC. India has a very strong reservation and on CPAC. And don't forget about this. This is the area which has directly been linked with the whole project. So from Chinese or from Pakistani point of view, I think this is also very important. That Indian buildup in Ladakh is also something to do with CPAC and how to, I will not say prevent it, but certainly create obstacle in that way. The second thing is Ladakh is also directly linked with Kashmir. So when we are talking about how Kashmir comes into this, the whole thing, it's like Ladakh is a part of the disputed state of Kashmir. And August 5 last year, action for annexation, unilateral annexation of Kashmir, is also actually Ladakh was separated from Kashmir and made a part of Indian Federal Union. So all that way, actually, Kashmir is also Kashmir issue has also comes into that. Now, well, actually, so far, Chinese reaction has been restrained. Yes, correctly, but it has a much deeper ramification, not only for region, but also globally. There's talk about India getting much closer to America. If you have seen this eminent former National Security Advisor, Indian advisor, yes, if you have seen this interview with the print, in which actually the whole thing is that India should get more strategically close to America. And it's not just about, strategically, but also they are talking about greater economic and trade relations between the two countries. So in their calculation is that, yes, actually, if the falling out of China has deeper economic and trade impact on them, so they can look towards America. So I think probably one should also see the balance of power or geostrategic situation, how it's changing. The other thing which you are talking about Afghanistan. So before coming to Afghanistan, I'll also one thing. India actually has a problem with other areas like Nepal. We have just mentioned about it. Nepal situation is getting much more serious. And it also brings in China into the matrix. The second thing is that Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, they had good relations, but they have certain points. The other thing which is also worry for India is basically what's happening in Afghanistan. From outset, India has been opposed to any peace deal with Taliban or any peace negotiation, America's peace negotiation with Taliban. It has moved forward, and I think now it is going into second stage, that is intra-Afghan dialogue, which is going to be started. Maybe actually there is still some obstacles, some hindrances, and that could be removed. Well, actually, in this situation, it's quite interesting, the Pakistani decision to open one trade route to India. That has been there's a long-standing demand of Afghanistan, and it was actually, and that has also a point of tension between the two countries for quite some time. And this also actually, Afghanistan has refused to give Pakistan access to Central Asia. I think probably it's it's a more of a confidence building measure by Pakistan, particularly at this stage when the peace negotiation in Afghanistan has gotten into critical stage. So in a way, actually, by giving this, Pakistan has tried to restore some confidence with the Kabul government. And actually, I don't see its implication beyond that. I don't see actually it's going to change the whole metric or any way actually that's going to happen. As far as Pakistan and India is concerned, I think yes, actually, the Ladakh incident is going to have direct implication on India-Pakistan relations. It has already, because we have already seen that after August 5, tension has been increasing. Line of control the incident has increased. And I think probably India did not think in the way that it will, China will take such a tough position. But I think probably, I don't think, yes, there has been talk about false flag operation. But, well, actually, India will again be miscalculating if it does something on Pakistani, this kind of what they described as surgical operation or whatever. They may be thinking, they may be actually as part of their strategic thinking or tactical thinking. But I doubt it very much that at this point of time, even if they want, they will be expanding the area of conflict. So if they do so, let's hope actually that, and Pakistan is already prepared. As far as Pakistan and India's relation, I doubt it very much actually any positive development is going to take place. India basically is still very belligerent attitude. And well, actually, after August 5, the whole dynamics have changed. So in a way, actually, even if there's talk happened, there's no actually relation, even diplomatic relations between India and Pakistan has been reduced to almost minimum. So there is no question of any breaking of ice between them. So the tension will continue. On the western side, Pakistan is basically now could be more satisfied with the development in Afghanistan, but it does not mean that the problem on the western border has come to an end. Let's see actually what's going to happen in the intra-Afghan dialogue. Let's see actually what America has already started pulling out, despite all those theories that it will not. They have already vacated 5 bases, and so the withdrawal or drawing down of American troops has already started. So in a way, actually, Pakistan, what is Pakistan's interest in Afghanistan is that how successful the talks are, and it leads to some kind of political settlement in Afghanistan. That's Pakistan's interest. And I think probably that is the most critical interest of Pakistan at this point of time. So I think this opening of this trade route is largely actually to build confidence with Kabul that, well, actually Pakistan is not an adversary. So that will have a positive impact on intra-Afghan dialogue also. I'll stop here.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. I want to focus brings the line to Musharraf. Musharraf, the drawdown in Afghanistan, the US drawdown in Afghanistan seems to be moving, fumbling forward, but there is forward movement. But at the same time, in recent days, we have seen very categorical policy statements from Washington, D.C., both the military and the civil side on the India-China standoff, whereby DC seems to have taken a clear-cut position on supporting New Delhi vis-a-vis any quote-unquote aggression from its neighbors. Now, if it is drawing down, is Washington preparing for a new conflict that Zaid Saab has alluded to? Are you looking at a larger conflict? Because if you also look at the chorus of support that we've particularly seen coming from the Quad members in support of Delhi, how is the international dimension playing out of this regional escalation?
Thank you, Amara. Thanks to the Jinnah Institute for organizing this. I can hear at least one disturbance. If we could perhaps mute it. Yeah, I think Fatmi Saab is also um, not muted. Regardless, look, the international dimension is I think fascinating, but I do think that it has become, unfortunately for India, it has and for its neighbors, sadly, as an externality, it has become a habitual thing for New Delhi to overestimate its importance and its role in the region and in the world. I think that the statements of support from the US are not really statements of support for India. They are statements of aggression towards China, which is part of a wider context of aggression between China and the US that is rooted in uh, a whole bunch of things, maybe 100 other things more important to the United States or to Japan or to Australia, speaking of the Quad, than India's territorial claims in Greater Kashmir. I think, when we talk about Ladakh as some sort of, being related to Kashmir, I think that's fundamentally unsound and inaccurate. Ladakh is part and parcel of the Kashmir dispute. It is without question the Kashmir dispute that has caused the conflict between India and China. And so I think from a Pakistan perspective, that angle is particularly important, because if India had listened to reason and sat down and tried to resolve Kashmir, I don't think this Ladakh thing would ever have happened. I also think that there's something else that India is doing, that it has been doing for a long time, I would say at least 2 decades, in terms of overestimating, is that when it overestimates itself, it also sees its supposed adversaries from its own lens. And I think that is a big mistake. And that is where there is common ground between the Quad and India, India being part of the Quad, or between the US and India, or, in recent days, there's been an interesting, Alice Wells, just a couple of days ago, appealed for, better transatlantic relations so that the EU, US, and India could contain China, which I mean, I think is adorable. But not really within the realm of reason or even responsibility in terms of senior officials, ex-officials, future senior officials making statements like that. And I think, much like sometimes Pakistanis get carried away on a number of issues because we're emotional people, I think one of the reasons why we've gotten along so well with the Americans is I think the Americans are pretty emotional too. So I think that as far as saying things about China, they'll happily say the things that that are on their mind, and full, fair play to them. They should certainly express themselves, but reality is a little bit different. So just, I wanted to touch on one aspect of reality that I think doesn't get spoken of enough in Pakistan or globally, and that is, why does China behave the way that it does? Now, I think, again, having talked to so many British and American diplomats in particular, I think that's maybe the cruelty of language, is that, the English language, I think, binds us in a way, so we end up having more conversations with these folks. But the Americans and the Brits think about China from a starting point of malign intent. And again, I think that that's a position that is rooted in emotion and history, but not in reality. That's not to suggest that China is not incapable of malign behavior. Every state, in pursuit of its national interests, can do anything, frankly. And these ideas of morality for states, I've always found very strange. What is interesting is we should assess China's behavior based on its recent behavior. And if you look at the entire spectrum of Chinese behavior, internally and externally, it is fundamentally about expanding the ability of Chinese companies to do business. That's really what Chinese foreign policy and national security is predicated upon. Is it aggressive? Absolutely. CPEC is an aggressive Chinese infrastructure play to create warm water, deep port access that is an alternative to what it has on its shores. And that alternative is necessitated by a number of factors, including cost and shortness of distance, but also including tensions in the South China Sea. So if we look at what China could gain from being aggressive towards India or taking an extra 2 kilometers, finger 2 instead of 4, finger 4 instead of 6, finger 8 instead of 12. You know, a lot of the Indian analysis is making the same mistake Indian analysis makes everywhere when it looks at its neighborhood, which is that it assumes malign intent on everyone else's part and pure intent on the Indian state's part. But there is no foundationally, not a single reason that anybody can actually point to that China would gain from this conflict. China actually, strategically and tactically, this is a cost that China didn't want to incur. So the fact that China has done this is probably more to do with Indians pushing China into this position. And I think the Indians are actually much smarter than we give them credit for on that front, because having had this conflict, the marketing of India to the Quad and to the United States as its only play in this region and as a bulwark against Chinese expansion is, you know, obviously that's a much better and more appealing ad. I'll stop there, but obviously there's lots more to say, and I'm keen to hear others' views.
Thanks, Musharraf. I'm mindful of the time factor. I also understand that Naseem has to leave us early because of a personal engagement. So, Naseem, I'm going to take a parting comment from you. To me, it seems that the House is kind of divided on the role of China moving forward. Is China going to do this, or is it not going to, get into the aggression trap or the Cold War trap? What kind of role do you see Pakistan assuming in such a flux situation? And Pakistan has a unique position historically in facilitating relations between the US and China. What could be Pakistan's policy options vis-a-vis the larger so-called Cold War 2.0? Please unmute yourself.
Okay, so the China US rapprochement that we managed in the 70s, I think that's something of the past. I do see, however, that the Chinese are going to remain. No, sorry, you wanted Pakistan. From Pakistan, I think what we are doing on our western front, what we are doing on west of Pakistan, what we're doing with Central Asia, with Afghanistan, with Iran, I think it's not just a passing CBM. I think it is significant. And if we see, for example, with Iran opening of 5 trading borders after a long time, what we're trying to do with Afghanistan, and there's something that we see in terms of government policy, and then Amara, there's things happening in terms of trade, that our access to Central Asia is from Afghanistan. And I've been doing some work on this in the last few weeks, and it's fascinating to see how many trading groups from Pakistan and also different industries from Pakistan, how they're actually using Afghanistan and using different modes of transportation and actually using Afghanistan as a route going into Central Asia. What I found in the last few weeks is that the government and the trading community, the business community, everywhere and the security community, mind you, there is a convergence there. There is a realization that opening up on the trading fronts on the west of Pakistan is very important. And actually things are happening which don't come out in the open. We're not talking about them. We hear about 2 shots here and 3 people killed here, but what's happening on the ground is quite fascinating. So I think that Pakistan's policy, and we keep going back to the Kartar movement. Kartarpur movement. We opened it, then we went back again, and I think that in some ways is it tells us about Pakistan's consensus within Pakistan that whenever India is going to be ready to engage, we will be willing to engage without compromising on the Kashmir issue. We'll keep our focus on Kashmir, keep our possibilities with India open, and basically go on a very kind of aggressive mode on as far as west of Pakistan is concerned. This is something that started in the 90s. Nawaz Sharif pushed for it. Asif Ali Zardari, that government with Gwadar, opening up of the Gwadar, the IPI, etc., and on on how significant the economic dimension is. Let me also say that we talk about India leaving IPI, which it has publicly, but for example, India is still part of Turkey. This Turkmenistan, Afghanistan pipeline, and Pakistan, India, and it is very much there. And so I don't, that's a dimension. It seems that Pakistan is finally recognizing, and obviously add to all of this CPEC, add to this, the Chabahar port, and look at the road links that Pakistan has put down in place. So I find that very fascinating, and it seems almost that our foreign policy is finally recognizing how important it is to move on the economic front, which is not to say that we're not mindful of the Indian threat. I think that more we will see India using terrorism as a tool, and is going to push more and more, and we will have to face that challenge. Its adventure along the LOC, etc. That whole thing we've discussed in detail. So that stays, that doesn't change at all. And on Kashmir, we will continue to do what we are doing. And I think obviously the Kashmir committee is a joke. We need to be more proactive there, whether it's on human rights fronts, and that in itself is an important area which I don't think this government is doing enough. You see Dr. Sheel Mazari once in a while writing, writing letters, sending off letters, but where's the Kashmir committee? All of that. So I think this is how I see this situation. And China's, one, I think China is going to go for containment, because through containment of India, it can actually go ahead with CPEC, it can go ahead with BRI, and it's containment and engagement. That's China's policy, and that's what we're going to see in I think years to come, unless and obviously we need to see whether India's aggression by India will yield anything positive for India. I don't think the US is game for anything, any aggression, but for containing China in South China Sea, and the economic challenges that commercial economic challenges that Salman Bashir Saab talked about, those will be dealt with through dialogue more than through force. Thank you so much, Amara.
Thank you, Naseem, fair and square. Thank you for joining us for the discussion. Tariq Fatmi Saab, I want to quickly come to you. And we are now moving towards the last round of quick comments by our esteemed panelists before we head towards conclusion. Fatmi Saab, so connectivity is the emerging paradigm, led by China's Belt and Road Initiative. And you've got TAPI, as Naseem mentioned, you've got other regional, connectivity, geo-economic partnerships emerging. China, Pakistan, Central Asian republics, all very included. Iran also now with the recent China and Iran deal. The wild card seems to be Russia. Given your extensive experience, in that country, what kind of role do you see Russia playing in this emerging conflicted scenario between conflict and connectivity?
Thank you very much. A fascinating discussion. I love the remarks made by the people. Russia was described 100 years ago, no, 70 years ago, as a mystery wrapped in an enigma that nobody has been able to unravel. Now, in fact, Russia is going through tremendous problems within the country. Their economy is in doldrums. The political leadership for the first time faces serious questions, particularly after Putin's constitutional change, wherein he's declared he can be there till 36 and all the rest of it. But Russia will traditionally stay away from taking sides between conflict between China and India for its bigger strategic interests. It has developed very strong economic ties with China, particularly in the last 7-8 years. Nearly $400 billion worth of oil and gas the Chinese are taking from the Russians. They are developing the Siberian area. They are developing the Sevastopol area. They are developing areas where there are no Russians because the population is decreasing who can go and engage in activities there. And at the same time, the fervor and enthusiasm for retaining their historic linkages with India is still very much there, even though there is not much substance left in it. Trade is still there, but purchase of armaments and sophisticated weaponry has come down. The Indian preference is for American or French or whatever it is, rather than for Russians. And people in India have commented on it as to why we are not buying things from Russia. So Russia will use its relationship with China and India to counsel restraint on both of them. Also because they don't want the Americans to come in and create problems in the region, because it will have an impact on Russia's own ambitions in the region. Russia perceives itself, has always perceived for 1,000 years, that it is an Asian power. Now, having said that, I want to move slightly away from your question and ask my fellow panelists that what does this panel think as to what Pakistan should do? Because India having revoked 370, as far as the Indians are concerned, this issue is no longer there between India and Pakistan, whereas we had always brought it as the number one issue whenever we wanted a dialogue with India. India was always willing to talk about anything else other than Kashmir. We wanted to talk about everything, but also including Kashmir. So where does it leave us? What do we do now? Because frankly, this is my view and people can object, and I'll touch it very mildly lest I upset some of my colleagues there. I think we were caught napping. And when the government says that we were surprised, I said, I'm surprised that you are surprised, because there was nothing surprising about the Indian action. They had announced it from the rooftops. It was part of their agenda. We all knew that the day Modi has the right degree of support in the Rajya Sabha and the Lok Sabha, he will revoke 370. That's the kind of man he is. And having done now, how do we engage in a dialogue with India? Do we talk about trade, transit, energy, transportation, water, climate, environment, and all that? Or do we actually give up all kinds of discussions with the India? To me, that's an important issue.
Salman Saab, thank you, Tariq Saab. Salman Saab, do you want to respond to this pertinent question by Fatmi Saab? What should Pakistan do now? Please unmute yourself, Salman Saab.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I think I will give you my thinking on the concept. COVID-19, post-COVID times, general world economy, wars coming up, especially in Pakistan's traditional markets, Europe, America. So, and that applies to every country, in the world. So we are going to see an entirely new situation in terms of our exports, etc. And the clear common sense answer is that we should be thinking regional. And I think Pakistan is very well placed, in this regard. And that's why I mentioned at the very beginning that while India has placed premium on geopolitics, we are seeing the unfolding of steps now in terms of geoeconomics. The whole essence and the concept of this Chinese BRI initiative, of which the PEC is a part, is not just confined to Pakistan. It has to extend towards Afghanistan, towards Iran, Chabahar, Gwadar, develop as sister ports and have to be linked together. The CPEC vision should extend to Turkey and to the Gulf states if they so wish. So it is this direction that CPEC and the BRI will take. The main economic game is, to all purpose and intent, confined on developing Eurasia as the main power center, economic power center. It is up to the UK or to the European countries now either to fall in line with the US policies, to keep Huawei 5G away. I began by saying that, the geopolitics, what is behind the geopolitics today? It is the weaknesses that have come to surface within Western economies. And I think President Trump personally is mindful of the fact in all these years that he needs Chinese support economically to rebuild the American infrastructure. I think much of this part is lost in the repeat of the Cold War rhetoric that we see coming from Western think tanks. Now, for instance, the Europeans will have to decide, and not only the Europeans. What about Japan? If you look at Japan China trade, it is much more than the Japan US trade. And take, for that matter, Taiwan and Korea and the investments. So, if you take a sort of a total aggregate view of the economic state of play, and what happens to countries like Singapore and other ASEAN countries, they will find themselves in the same situation. So, that's why I argue that India with Modi has made a big strategic blunder. Today, as is evident from this discussion, India is increasingly isolated even within the region. It has suffered huge reputational damage after Ladakh. And of course, India is no match to Chinese economic power, technological power, and military power. But what are the Chinese saying? They have not taken the US on. They are clear about their rights, be it in the South China Sea or Taiwan or Tibet. It is, they don't have an agenda beyond that. What is the BRI? I mean, today a question was asked whether there is a possibility of CPEC becoming multilateral, moving from bilateral China Pakistan to more. And I said, yes, we should be seriously thinking of multilateralizing CPEC because the BRI concept basically is an inclusive concept. So we should be thinking, I think now, place emphasis on geoeconomics. That's our advantage. And leave India alone. I don't see, as Tariq, in terms of Tariq's question, any possibility of Pakistan, India coming to a dialogue. There is nothing to discuss. The Indians have, taken a line which none of us, who worked in India and who worked on this could have ever imagined. The sort of hostility that they have shown towards Pakistan reflects deep-seated resentment. Even in the Ladakh episode, the Indian commentators are saying that, well, the Indian military was prepared against Pakistan. They never, although they were trying to, say that they can match up to the Chinese in terms of benefiting from US and the Quad. But even today, the Indian generals are saying that they were only trying to sort of be prepared to deal with Pakistan. Even today, the Indian television is again harping back to the theme of terrorism. Hafiz Saeed, it's a 30-year-old mantra. So let them stew in their own making, what they have created for themselves. We must have a positive mindset. Pakistan, alhamdulillah, today is much better place, to assume. I think, and let me quote here a tweet from Praveen Swani. This was yesterday I saw, where he says that Pakistan will occupy the strategic space India has vacated in this region. I think it is coming from an Indian analyst, and it is based, I believe, on some sort of quantification and reason. There is
Right.
already too much of despondency, which has been spread. Uh, the Maldives situation is in a flux, although the Maldivian government is okay.
I'm mindful of the time
Great.
factor. I want to quickly circle in now General Khavar and Zaid Saab and Musharraf before we head on to Sherry's concluding remarks. I'm mindful of the time factor. General Khavar, your very quick comment on the way forward. how can this, militarism approach of India be deflected by Pakistan in favor of connectivity project?
Um, so I think Pakistan as well as India have to operate in a global environment. I think we must understand that. And we also understand the Indian desire to deflect everything else that is happening in the region and that has happened to them through the militarism approach. As it is, the world is, no matter how slowly, moving from unilateralism to multilateralism. And in the multilateralism, quite obviously, as in this emerging bloc, Pakistan has an expanding space than than we had before in the past. I guess, and issues such as Kashmir are not short-term issues. I think the nations have to live with them while continued focus on the end-term objective that the nations have to achieve. Indian approach of militarism, I guess the only way is to continue to look, first of all, inwards, continue to make the world realize of our desire not to be militaristic in approach, which we haven't been, and now we have actually detached ourselves and exposed to the world what the Indians have done in the past to divert the world's attention from the real issues to the peripheral issues and blaming Pakistan for all the reasons, for all the bad things that have happened in the region. And I think we need to continue to remain focused on our strategic objective of getting this right of self-determination for Kashmiris.
Thank you. Zahid Saab, quick comment on strategic
I
objective.
I want to make a 30-second correction. Salman, you miss, with your permission, Salman, you miss it. That is exactly what I said, that after 370, is there any scope for further conversation with India? So I'm with you that what the Indians have done is actually to destroy any prospects of a peaceful resolution of our problems.
Zahid Saab, way forward with India. Your quick comment.
Well, I think, as we all agree that there is no chance or no possibility of any actually movement as far as India-Pakistan relations is concerned. What we have actually already have some more strategic space now than before. And Modi has particularly been claiming to isolate Pakistan, and that never happens, and probably it's a kind of other way around. So I think probably what Pakistan should do at the moment, that instead of actually just thinking about whether there is a possibility of any talk or negotiation, we should concentrate on our own, like, for example, China-Pakistan relations, that has been very critical. To build a new relationship in the region, that is basically very important. And I think probably instead of, of even actually having this kind of, that some country or the US can play some kind of mediator role, we should forget about it, and we should not talk about it. It is not going to happen, and it is basically a self-deception. The second thing is that, at this point of time, what we should be careful about is that there's no, I don't think India can directly attack Pakistan, but there is a covert war which is going on. And that is basically the Indian, I think, tactics at this point. We have seen actually how there's escalation in violence in Balochistan, escalation in violence in North Waziristan. And I think there's also one thing we should be very careful about. How India is going to or try to play a spoiler role in Afghanistan. That's basically should be our concern. And I don't think we should be worried at this point of time whether how to actually start negotiation with India, how to do it. I don't think it's going to work. And it's all Kashmir issue is all Kashmir is depend on Kashmiris themselves. And I think probably it's not Indian problem as much as anybody. It's basically it's India how to tackle with this issue with all kind of problems, domestic problems at hand.
Thank you, Raisab, you made a very important point about Pakistan taking care of the covert security threat posed by India. Musharraf, my last question is towards you. It's actually coming from our audience who've been sending us a lot of questions. This one is specifically for you. While military option is off the cards for Pakistan, what other steps Pakistan can take to improve its position in South Asia economically and strategically? This is the last question before we move on to Sherry's.
So I think it's a great question, and I think it's whoever's asking the question is thinking in exactly the right way. I think that Pakistan's great national potential has been underserved by allowing ourselves to get dragged into a hard power competition. Pakistan's real advantage is that it is the indispensable ally for virtually any nation on the planet that wants to have any kind of serious engagement with this region. If you want to do trade with any of the, I would say, probably not Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, because they're geographically separate. Russia's independence. This probably, you could probably separate out Georgia and Ukraine as well. That still leaves 9 former Soviet republics that have an integral potential relationship with Pakistan. We can cancel out Armenia because of our commitment and friendship with the Azeris and with the Turks, and that's a huge window of opportunity. The regional, Naseem was talking about this as well. Our opportunities in terms of regional integration have been denied to us because strategically we've played the tactical game. The strategy should have been that whatever Afghanistan needs to feel comfortable from Pakistan, short of core national interests, should be ceded to the Afghans as the smaller, poorer, landlocked country that's already been through as much as it has. And the reason you see that is not as a submission or not as a cessation of any of your legitimate claims. The reason you cede it is that you then allow Afghanistan to feel confident that it can also afford the concessions that Pakistan wants from it, not in terms of the things we like to talk about most, ethnicity, nationalism, violence, conflict, but the things we don't talk about, which are the pipelines, the pathways, the free movement of goods, people, trade, and ideas. So I think those are the areas that Pakistan needs to concentrate on. And I think that there's a lot of lessons in both India and Chinese behavior before, during, and after what's happened in Ladakh. One of them is that India is clearly playing the mid to long-term game by essentially turning the other cheek, despite the massive provocation. Now, I don't at all subscribe to the idea that Pakistan should adopt that posture, but Pakistan should examine carefully what it is that causes India to behave in a completely different way with a country like Pakistan and a completely different way with a country like China. There are the obvious answers and there are the less obvious answers, and we should always seek to list down the things that aren't obvious and to try and keep them in our pockets for when things get tight.
Excellent, Musharraf. Thank you. So Sherry, the House has spoken. Looks like Pakistan is being advised to manage India as we have done so far and explore newer avenues towards connectivity and upping the regional economic game. I would request you to please share your concluding thoughts with us on potential ways forward and building on these ideas.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Amara, for patiently going through some very fast and bright thoughts on the subject. I think we're kind of looking, refracting what we see as a regional problem in a global context, which is obviously what is needed. Here, we've come to the conclusion that geoeconomics is our only advantage. This is not a new one. This is a line of thinking and strategic planning that has been pushed, plugged, and amplified over the years by many independent thinkers and analysts. And there's been a strong strain of investment in that thinking as well, even from quarters of state and government. Now, what governments have been doing in Pakistan, at least for the last 3 governments, is they've been consistent over some issues such as seeking strategic stability, seeking peace in Afghanistan, building on our relationship with China, but also not falling into the trap of becoming locked into Cold War alliances, which should elude everybody. And I don't think the world is being divided into a Cold War a set of camps with the Iron Curtain, but there is a growing encouragement of global binaries, which I think we should look to eschew. Entanglements in the region, Iran, Afghanistan, every actor is playing there, including Russia, even Oman, everybody. Actor is playing in the region, are looking at balancing their own interests. It is no longer simple. Having said that, the unipolar moment for the United States is clearly over and waning. Without a power having taken over the multilateral stage. I see multilateralism as very different from multipolarity, and that's multilateralism has really not become operational, which and multipolarity has. So that leaves a more chaotic regional and global space for Pakistan to operate in. Both the lack of multilateralism and the increase in multipolarity will leave a more chaotic and anarchic legal framework, if you like, or of laws and fault lines to operate in. So I think Pakistan has to be very, very careful right now. The dots don't always connect between rhetoric and planning. They certainly don't. We are at pains to assure India that we are not seeking war, and I think that's a sensible thing to do. But I don't think that Indian posturing allows very little space for Pakistan to be politically unresponsive. And here there is a competition in the region. While I subscribe to the containment argument, I think we have lost a bit of time and track on the fact that something momentous has happened. China with BRI has, and of course CPEC is its poster child, whether it's in optimal operational situation or not, it's not the point. The point is China has a strategic foothold in Gwadar, and that, if even slightly operationalized, as Musharraf says, across the stands and into the Russian heartland and across it makes China a 2-ocean power. And that is what is making, other than the economic competition, I mean, throwing Huawei out will have impact. But coming back to Pakistan, drawing right down here, we are loath to see ourselves in any self-reviewing context. And I think what we haven't, here we have caught on to it, but we get very pulled into broad conversations because we're so busy analyzing the world. We're not looking at the tactical and strategic disadvantage and advantage we have accrued over the last 6 months even, especially after August 5th. Obviously, the unilateralism was a trauma for Pakistan. But here again, you see an opportunity. Ladakh and Kashmir are an opportunity, and they're inextricably linked. I am saying that is the strategic bedrock of China's position, yet, even as Pakistan, we are loath to make something of it. I don't mean military options. Not at all. I think we're talking about the world of soft and economic power. We are loath to make something of that. Even in analysis, our mind wanders to very broad ripples causing changes across the world, because we have to also grapple with that. Of course we do. But here's one big structural change that's happened. And China is not a big messenger in its Confucian reality, but it has changed. It has also changed. It is still flexing muscle. And the world is analyzing China in very different ways, while we are not looking at it at the structural change just now that China is openly saying. They are now a party to the Kashmir conflict. None of us really are getting into that beyond a point. We are too busy grappling with what we see as many, many open fronts. India does, and having finally said that, I think the whole business of labeling is very important now in global diplomacy. China has been labeled a wolf warrior, and there's many such iterations of that. China may be involved in this or not, but the point is, right now it is Indian predations that have led to this, to this Himalayan stakeout between three nuclear countries. And China is at the heart of this at the United Nations disputed territory. And we at a multilateral level have not really talked about this. Our monumental restraint in itself speaks to a strategic stalemate in our own minds. We are so trapped like a deer in headlights that even when events are revolving out of our making, we didn't make this, but it has landed in our lap. There have been, I mean, the reverberations of Modi, say before a Bihar election, acting out in Pakistan, false flag strike. I've laid those out. We've laid those out last week. My point here is there is also an opportunity, and it's a huge diplomatic opportunity that we need to explore and tap into. And I really want to thank everybody who has brought their expertise, their thinking, and their time, most valuably, to this public conversation. Let's keep building on it and thinking about these things. Thank you very much, Amara, also.
Thank you, Sherry. Clear and present opportunities for multilateralism. I want to thank you, Sherry, and all our esteemed panelists, as well as all our audience who tuned in and sent lots of comments and questions. Clearly, there's opportunity for much more Chow virtual dialogues moving on from here. And we look forward to speaking to all of you in our future dialogues. Thank you so much.